24th Annual Academy of Country Awards was held in Las Vegas, with nearly 12 million viewers tuning in to watch the event. As the country music singers exited their vehicles to enter the theater, an area was established for the stars to walk on the red carpet, which was televised by ET and streamed online by E! Along the red carpet, thousands of fans gathered to support their favorite artist. The fans also hoped the country music singers would come close enough to the barriers to sign an autograph, a book, or a poster. Some of the artists agreed to be interviewed by the press that they could promote an upcoming music album release date or their upcoming concert plans. It seemed for the most part that some of the stars were treated with respect, but some of the singers were treated, in my opinion, rudely. For example, the person who interviewed Carrie Underwood started out with some friendly questions, and then became insulting when they expressed astonishment that Carrie could actually fit into her dress after her recent pregnancy. With cutting remarks like that, it's tough to fathom why anyone would enjoy walking down the red carpet and stopping even to grant interviews. But the stars seem to recognize that their fans love the glamour, the gossip, and the meanness. None of this is new, though, as evident by the events that took place during Holy Week, starting with today, Palm Sunday. The city of Jerusalem was building and bustling with spiritual pilgrims from all over the region who had gathered for the Passover festival. The people were already in a celebrative mood when Jesus arrived at the city entrance riding on a donkey. Luke says Jesus was received with waving palm branches for all the deeds of power that they had seen. Witnesses of Jesus' ministry viewed Jesus as a superstar, and he received a hero's welcome as people laid their coats on the ground before him. Yet, like a modern celebrity, Jesus was at first idolized and then picked apart. The crowd believed that Jesus' grand entrance into Jerusalem as the Messiah meant that he was entering the city as a mighty conqueror. They believed that Jesus would overthrow their Roman occupiers, and they thought Jesus would become their king. Then he would usher in a new era of God's realm on earth. And the people were excited and shouted, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." And they shouted, "Hosanna," which means save now. The people were demanding that Jesus save them now. It began as an earnest plea, and it became a demand. A demand that Jesus conform to their desires and their plans. But Jesus shocked the crowd when he did not march directly to the Roman brigade to lead an insurrection against God's pagan enemies. Instead, Jesus entered the temple and overthrew the coin tables and drove out the coin changers. Tossing the tables over, he intentionally drew attention to himself, which was behavior outside the norm for Jesus. Typically, Jesus did not want to be the center of attention, as evident when he healed people of illnesses. He firmly instructed them to keep quiet and not to post this on social media. Do not tweet. Sternly, he ordered witnesses to keep this information on the down low. However, at the temple, Jesus took a dramatic, out-of-character step, and his action went viral, though not in a good way. By turning the tables over, Jesus lit a fuse. And from that point on, the conversations about Jesus became negative. Cheers became jeers. Praise turned into condemnation. Crucify! Crucify him! This shift in attitude happened because the people realized that Jesus had not come to drive out the oppressive Romans. Instead, he was highlighting their political and religious shortcomings and their failure to confront injustice among their own people. When Jesus turned over the tables, he effectively called attention to the abuse the poor, the alienated, and the widows suffered at the hands of the coin changers and the temple merchants, who forced these groups to purchase temple coins and goods at unfair exchange rates. The practices at the temple are equivalent to our modern predatory payday loan companies who intentionally open a shop in low-income neighborhoods and target the elderly and military service members with tempting interest rates, but with hidden fees which earn exuberant amounts of interest. These interest rates range from 39 to 1,000%. It's mind-blowing. and it depends on what state regulations exist. But these people are trapped into a vicious cycle of poverty so that additional loans are required to pay for ballooning past loans. Thankfully, some faith-based groups have encouraged state governments to regulate these unjust practices and even put an end to these types of predatory loans. However, ending or transforming how predatory loan practices work has been a challenge because the faith-based groups only represent a minority, and their calls to end predatory loans is met with great opposition. These faith-based groups are taking on the Goliaths of the lending industry and political lobbyists. In addition, these payday loan companies are supported by city councils who view the tax revenue and small job creation as a benefit for their community, which in their minds outweighs the financial devastation some families experience. Turning over tables to reveal the truth of injustice, whether as a whistleblower or as an advocate for social justice, will risk alienating friends, losing supporters, and even our fan base may pick us apart, as Jesus discovered, and many clergy and church members continue to discover. For example, Beth Moore has been called one of the most effective Bible teachers in the modern evangelical Christian community, especially among women. She has spoken at big-name churches like Saddleback Church and Hillsong. She's best friends with Rick Warren. She was the first woman also to have a Bible study published by the conservative Christian publishing house Lifeway, and she sold over 22 million copies of her first published Bible study. A leader of the Southern Baptist Convention told The Atlantic that it would be hard to find a church where at least some segment of the congregation has not been through at least one Beth Moore study. However, lately she's been turning over tables about sexual abuse in the church with her own response to the hashtag #MeToo movement called hashtag Silence is Not Spiritual. She is appalled by sexual misconduct in the worlds of politics and in the church because she knows too many persons who have experienced harassment or abuse as she herself was abused as a child. In a tweet to her nearly 900,000 followers, she said, "Wake up, sleepers, to what women have dealt with all along in environments of gross entitlement and power." After that tweet, churches began to cancel her appearance engagements. She received phone calls from evangelical church leaders calling on her to recant and apologize for her tweet. And she has received messages from women who have called to say that they used to read her Bible studies for years, but they will not read another. Regardless of these attacks and threats, she remains adamant that men should not treat women any less than Jesus treated women in the Gospels. Always with dignity, always with esteem, never as secondary citizens. She recognizes that she's turning tables over, and she recognizes that this way of thinking will cost her personally and professionally, but she has no regrets. After all, as we are reminded on this Palm Sunday, Jesus entered Jerusalem and made a political and a religious statement, one which earned him a cross as a reward, even as he called the community back to God to follow God's way. And he was the biggest superstar the world has ever seen. Still, cheers turned to jeers, and Jesus was killed on Friday, because he failed to live up to the human fantasies of the type of Messiah that they wanted. And he was picked apart because he didn't fulfill the demands of the crowd who envisioned that he would change the world so they could enjoy life on Easy Street. But Jesus didn't call his followers to take a life on Easy Street approach to the world. Rather, he insisted that we should embrace our personal crosses, so we should carry each other's burdens. And when and where we see an injustice, he called us to do something about it. Whether that means we name the injustice or wrong through whistleblowing or by protesting. Our responsibility is to name the things which are not right for the common good or isn't pleasing to God. Naming those things that are not right or unjust may not be popular or well received among the populace, and it may cause us to be picked apart, face legal jeopardy, risk losing supporters and friends, and potentially risk physical violence. But Jesus risked himself for us when he set an example of how we are to put love into action by speaking up in love. He did this because he so loved the world that he gave everything he had and for it, including his life, saying, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." And when Jesus stood above Jerusalem, he wept over the city and her residents because he recognized that they were more interested in chasing after glamour and fame than seeking justice for each other. And he wept knowing they would idolize him on Sunday, be disappointed on Monday, and he would experience their rage on Friday. After all, he had alluded to this type of treatment several times when he spoke to his disciples as he drew closer to Jerusalem. Yet Jesus did not compromise his call to be the Messiah that the world needed. He stepped off the red carpet and turned tables over in the temple to call attention to the injustices that were being practiced and the lack of compassion and lack of care and love that was being given. Instead of being the kind of superstar we wanted him to be, he embraced a cross to remind us that we have a responsibility as God's people to care for each other. How we treat each other, after all, means more to God than if a pagan empire had controlled a piece of territory or even ruled over the holy city. And Jesus came and provided a life-changing lesson as he gave of himself until there was nothing more to give. And he asks us to do the same. Not to make Jesus into the Messiah we want him to be, rather allowing him to be the Messiah the world needs, and allowing him to change our lives, calling attention to where we need to invest our energy, and he calls on us to embrace the cross and follow him with our eyes open to what God wants for the world, and doing so with compassion, and to do it with a mindset and an eye set where we see people around us viewing them as God views us, specially designed and crafted by God's hands and carrying within us the breath of God. Thus, we do not abuse anyone or take anyone for granted. Recognizing that we are loved and cared for by God, we are encouraged to seek Jesus' way of life, to be gentle with each other through love and action, to respect each other and not take advantage of each other. Jesus calls us back to practice Jubilee, which means obeying God's commands and loving each other as we love ourselves, treating each other as we want to be treated. He calls on us to recognize the political, theological, and social economic injustices and abuse that have taken place, to recognize where racism and genderism takes place, and to respond to those by putting it right. This way, everyone can see God's glory and realize that they are loved by God too. Loved and cared for by God. We are called on to live life by sharing Jesus' care with each other, instead of looking for ways to tear each other apart. As we follow Jesus' example of loving each other, let us see each other as God's children, brothers and sisters to each other. And let us be respectful of each other, not harassing or tearing each other down in pursuit of riches, fame, or power. Responding to Jesus' care and love. I invite you to stand as you're able as we sing from the red hymnal, number 195, verses 1, 2, and 5.